Ketso is a workshop in a bag. This video is part of a series introducing this kit for effective group work and goes through the stages of planning a workshop from beginnings to conclusion. Each piece of the Ketso kit acts as a prompt for key ideas that you need to remember in running a good workshop. For example, the centerpiece can be used to record the focus of the workshop, the branches can be used to give key themes, and the fact that there are different coloured leaves encourage participants to see the ideas from different perspectives. We've developed a simple acronym for planning a workshop. This is the BASICS: beginnings, activities, sequencing, inputs, conclusions, and the skippables, squashables, and supplements. Beginnings. It's important to think of the aims of the workshop and to think of who is coming or who should be invited. What do they want to get from the workshop? What's the focus of the workshop and why are you doing it? It's important to allow some time at the beginning of a workshop to make sure you go through the aims and the process with people. Because today is an introduction to Ketso, and we really want you to have lots of fun, do lots of activities, but also see quite a range of ways to use Ketso. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is by moving fairly quickly through the exercises so you get a flavour for it, because I actually want you to develop a research plan today. And I know most of you are thinking, what are you talking about? Develop a research plan by 12:30? But yep, we're going to develop a research plan by 12:30. And part of how we're going to do that is because when you hear the bell, you've got just under a minute to finish that kind of conversation, write those last ideas down, get that idea on the table, quickly get the leaves on the felt. And the second bell is time for quiet so we can move on to the next stage. Activities. What would you like people to do in the workshop? What kinds of issues do you want them to consider? How will you give them an activity to go through each stage of the workshop? You can use the legend to think through what sorts of activities you want to do. You may also want to consider if you have an external speaker or something that you need to do as part of the process. As well as thinking through the main exercise, it might be an idea to have a simple warm-up exercise at the beginning to get people used to using the leaves and moving them around on the felt, and just to get them warmed up. Actually, we want to just get going, like I say, so we can do something whilst a few more people drift in, welcome them to your table, get them to go with you. If you could each grab 3 of these brown leaves and one of the magic pens. If you could use a magic pen, because these are washable. Examples of such an exercise could be, what do you like to do? Or what in your experience helps groups of people to work together well? Or what is the importance of research? It can be a good idea to get people to share their ideas with a neighbour first, just to build confidence before they share their ideas with the group. Sequencing. It's where you start to think about the sequence and the flow of the workshop and what are the links between the different activities. You can use a Ketso planner to think about different sequences and try out different options and think how long each would take. You also want to consider how many breaks you're going to have and how long they are. Think about when they are, and that helps give a basic structure for your workshop. You may want to highlight key stages of the workshop and the times that they would need to be at so that you can manage the overall process. So because we are actually going to have a break at 11:15, what I want you to do is each think of what you think is the most important barrier. Now you'll notice that we didn't start with all the negative things, and especially if you're running a workshop, that's quite an important thing to remember. It's probably the one thing. An important hint to remember when you're thinking of sequencing is to start with a positive. This really helps to get a constructive and creative frame of mind. When you're planning an enterprise, for example, it's also really important to think of what you already have, what have you got access to, what works that you know about if you're actually going to get a business off the ground. It is also important to leave time to think of critical barriers, but later in the process, and we always suggest that you have a stage where you think of solutions to those problems afterwards. This helps people take a more creative and positive approach towards solving the problems. It's a good idea to encourage people to hold off on making judgments about ideas, first to get everything on the table, but to make sure you do allow for a stage of prioritizing and filtering ideas so that you can start to think about them in more depth later. Inputs. What ideas will you prepare in advance? What frameworks might you bring? It can really help to give people a framework to organize their ideas around. For instance, if you're planning a business, you do actually have to think of cash flow and financing and marketing, not just what a great product or idea you have. You can use the branches to develop themes and give some structure to the workshop. It's always a good idea to leave at least one blank branch, though, for themes that emerge or for things that don't fit. We have several suggestions for different themes for the branches for several kinds of workshops on our website. Sometimes the themes for branches are obvious, such as the major components of a course or key aspects of training you need to cover. Sometimes it takes a bit more thought and you need to think through, well, what are the key issues that we might need to consider? You may also find during a workshop that you haven't quite got it right. You can always rub one off with a wet cloth and rewrite a branch, and over time you'll learn more about which branches, which themes work well for particular workshops. You can also just have blank branches and see what themes emerge. Encourage people to put the leaves by them, and once you start to get some clusters, see what that theme might be. This can be great for exploring an idea or developing new understandings. It does tend to take a bit longer though, and it can be harder to compare and collate ideas between groups and perhaps between different workshops or over time, if that's important for what you're trying to do. You need to think about how and when you introduce your input so that people have a chance to develop their own thinking first and then see how it fits with the inputs that you've brought in. So for example, you may want to have the branches hidden whilst people start the workshop and then open them up later so that they can see where their ideas fit against those branches, but not feel overwhelmed or that they'll get it wrong to start with. Now what I'd like you to do is go around the circle and read out one idea at a time, going around your idea, and pop it against a branch. And obviously if it doesn't seem to fit on any of those branches, then put it on a blank and we'll see what emerges. Okay? You may also want to have some ideas pre-prepared on leaves, perhaps key challenges, or ideas that came up in earlier workshops or from a different group that you want to introduce. If you can do that after people have started developing their connections and ask them to think, where does this fit? Does this make you think of things differently? They'll have a very different relationship to the inputs and actually incorporate them into their own thinking and learn from them in a more effective way. Conclusions. It's also important to think of how you're going to draw the workshop to a conclusion. What are your key takeaway messages? Do you have a slide for that? Are you going to allow time for people to give feedback and pull together all the ideas? You need to think about what's going to happen to the outcomes. And it's a good idea to say at the beginning of the workshop what will happen to the outcomes if there's a process for feedback or how people will find out about it, and to reiterate that at the end so that people feel the conclusion of one workshop is really the beginning of the next stage of the process. You may also want to think of different points where you could end the workshop. I call these almost graceful exits. Where could you end the workshop and draw it together earlier if you need to, if time is overrunning? Skippables, squashables, and supplements. It's the rare workshop that goes totally according to plan. Ketso catalyzes discussion, and this sometimes means a stage takes longer than you expected. It's a good idea to think in advance which steps can most easily be skipped so you make sure you get the key stages. You may also want to think of which stages can be squashed so they take less time. For instance, by just giving out 1, 2, or 3 leaves, depending on how long you need it to take for a particular stage, or asking people to think of one key critical barrier. You can make this fun too. For instance, by making it a competition, which group can be the first to get 5 solutions to those problems on the table? Go! Sometimes a group also rushes through the thinking or doesn't really consider it in enough depth. You may want to think of some supplements, some extra ideas or prompts that you want to bring in at various points in the workshop just to challenge people, ask them to consider something from a different perspective. This may even just be a series of pictures. A really great supplement, particularly if people are going too quickly or the group dynamics are a little bit challenging, is to do a table swap and actually have people move and look at other groups' works. And very quickly, you've only got a few minutes to do this, so go and have a look at what the other groups have done, have a look at what they've been writing, and choose just quickly what do you think is the most interesting idea on the other table, okay? So you're going to move clockwise, you're only going to look at one table.
I think that's important because Cycling.
Campaign for cyclers' rights.
We do it at different times.
I just feel so unsafe when I'm cycling.
There's a simple template you can use to plan a workshop on our website. We often prepare an outline plan as a guide and a more detailed plan to act as a prompt whilst we're running a workshop. If you'd like to know more, there is another section with hints and tips on the actual process of running a workshop.